The Cleveland torso murders took place in the 1930s. During this time, a brutal killer stalked the streets of Cleveland. The unknown murderer gutted and beheaded around 12 victims. Although recent investigation has discovered about 13 more victims were also found from the 1920s to 1950s. Some of these victims were treated with a chemical substance so that their identity would never be found, therefore confusing the police investigations. It first started in September of 1934, when a woman's body was found washed up by Lake Erie near Cleveland. Her skin was red, indicating that some chemical weapons were used on her. Afterwards, she was known as the Lady of the Lake, since her head was never found. The police officers failed to identify her with no clues or suspects, at least until 1935, 1 year after the serial killers first appeared. Two teenage kids found a stripped man with his head and genitalia removed. His blood was all drained away. Because of his fingertips, he was identified as Edward Andrassy, a man rumored to be homosexual. Not far from Andrassy's case, another murder was also found. His skin was covered with the same chemical burn from the Lady of the Lake. This man was also decapitated and castrated. By the time the police had finally managed to connect all these cases, classifying this as a serial murder. But there was not much evidence. The next evidence was shown in 1936, when a woman was found shoveled between two baskets covered in newspaper, with her head also missing. Her fingertips allowed the police to recognize her as Flo Polillo, a bartender and prostitute. 6 months after, a case of a young man with his head severely damaged, washed, draining blood, and his body covered in tattoos was found. He became known as the Tattooed Man. A plastic version of his head was made in case anybody recognized him. Just as the Lady of the Lake, his identity was still a complete mystery. Afterwards, more bodies than usual were being found. Police officers continued investigating the case of a serial killer who aimed upon those of lower ranks in the society as his victims. By 1938, the Cleveland city was entering on panic, and the police officers, as a matter of desperation, raided Kingsbury Run, a homeless encampment where most victims belonged. 63 men were gathered. Search for any evidence followed, firing the complete encampment. After this, the murder seemed to stop, but the killer was still not found. Afterwards, in 1939, a bricklayer named Frank Dolezal was connected to the story. He once lived with Flo Polillo and was related with Edward Andrassy. They arrested him once he confessed to the killing, even though he did this by a very incoherent and unsecure way. Before the court, he was found hanging himself on his cell. A peculiar fact found was that the rope had been hanging 5 feet tall, making it hard to hang himself. It was later also found that he had broken ribs while he was in custody. His name was later cleared in 2010, leaving the real serial killer free, and the case unsolved.